My name is Emily Carter. I am 24 years old. And before you decide to feel sorry for me, let me tell you something that still shocks people when they hear it. The woman who stole my inheritance didn't break into my house, didn't forge a signature in the dark, and didn't run away with cash. She hugged me at my mother's funeral, cried on my shoulder, called me my girl, and then legally erased me from my own life. I didn't lose everything in one night. I lost it slowly, smiling, trusting, signing papers I thought would protect me. By the time I understood the truth, I was already homeless, and my family was rich. Before I go any further, if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Revenge has a voice. Some stories aren't told for sympathy. They're told so the truth can finally speak. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were clean and people knew each other as dogs by name. My life wasn't luxurious, but it was stable. My mother, Laura Carter, was my whole world after my father died. She worked hard, saved carefully, and believed in doing things the right way. She always told me that security mattered more than showing off, that a paid-off house and a savings account were freedom. I believed her because her life proved it. When my mother got sick, everything changed faster than I was ready for. At first it was small things, her getting tired easily, forgetting appointments, laughing it off. Then came the hospital visits, the tests. The words doctors spoke like they were normal, even though they sounded terrifying to me. I stayed strong for her, but at night I cried quietly in my room, afraid of a future I wasn't prepared to face. She passed away on a cold morning that felt unreal, like the world had decided to pause while mine collapsed. At her funeral, relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly appeared. My Aunt Margaret flew in from Chicago, perfectly dressed, confident, composed. My Uncle Richard came too, quiet but observant. They surrounded me with sympathy, telling me I was brave, telling me my mother would be proud. I wanted to believe them because grief makes you want to hold on to anyone who says you're not alone. A few days later, Margaret suggested we talk about legal matters. She said she wanted to take the burden off me. I was exhausted, emotionally numb, and completely unprepared to question her intentions. We sat in my living room, the same room where my mother and I used to drink coffee every morning. Papers were laid out neatly. Margaret explained things in a calm, professional tone, mentioning trusts, taxes, temporary arrangements. She said it was all routine, that it would protect me. I signed where she pointed, trusting that family would never intentionally hurt me. What I didn't know was that during my mother's illness, while I was juggling work and hospital visits, Margaret had already been working on a different plan. My mother's will had been changed under the excuse of simplifying things. By the time my grief cleared enough for me to ask questions, it was already too late. The house was no longer legally mine. The savings my mother had spent her entire life building were placed under a trust I didn't control. The official notice arrived quietly, like a polite slap to the face. 30 days to vacate the property. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the letter, rereading it until my eyes burned. I called Margaret immediately. She didn't answer. When she finally did, her voice was distant, almost annoyed. She said selling the house was the best decision, that I was too young to manage such responsibility, and that I should appreciate how kind they were being. I went to a lawyer, desperate for hope. He explained the reality gently, but clearly. Fighting it would take time, money, and emotional strength I didn't have. I walked out of his office knowing the truth I didn't want to accept. I had been betrayed, legally, cleanly, and perfectly. At the end of that month, I packed my life into my car. Clothes, a few books, my mother's old laptop, and memories I couldn't leave behind even if I tried. I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter, the same spot my mother always used, and walked away. I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because if I did, I knew I wouldn't have the strength to keep going into the unknown that had suddenly become my only option. Where my life learned how to turn a car, a basement, and eventually a garage into something that barely resembled a home, but was still a place where I could breathe. The first night, I slept in my car parked near a quiet strip mall on the edge of town. I kept the engine off to save gas, and wrapped myself in my jacket even though it wasn't that cold. The silence felt loud. Every sound outside made my heart race. I didn't sleep much. I just stared at the ceiling of my car, thinking about how quickly a normal life could disappear. I showered at work when I could, pretending everything was fine. I smiled at customers in the bookstore, helped them find novels and notebooks. While my entire life was folded into the trunk of my car, hunger became normal, pride became optional. I learned which gas stations were safest to park near, which nights were too risky, and how to wake up quickly if someone knocked on the window. Each morning, I fixed my hair in the rearview mirror and reminded myself that this was temporary, even when I didn't fully believe it. After 2 weeks, a coworker named Josh noticed something was wrong. I hadn't told anyone the truth, but exhaustion has a way of speaking for you. He offered me his parents' basement for cheap rent. It wasn't charity, he said, just space. I accepted because I had no other choice. The basement had a low ceiling, one small window, and smelled like old cardboard and paint. My bed was a thin mattress on the floor. At night, I could hear laughter and TV sounds upstairs, a reminder that normal life still existed, just not for me. That basement broke me in ways I didn't expect. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because it showed me how invisible I had become. I stopped being the girl with a future and became the girl who borrowed space. I cried quietly so no one would hear. Some nights, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and replayed every memory of my aunt's smile, every word she used to manipulate me, and I felt a rage I had never known before. Not loud rage, cold rage. I started reading obsessively. Business books, finance blogs, legal articles. I wanted to understand how money really worked, how trusts worked, how people like Margaret knew exactly which buttons to press. I used my mother's old laptop, its battery barely holding a charge, and taught myself things no one had ever taught me. I watched free online courses late at night, taking notes like my life depended on it, because it did. Eventually, Josh's parents needed the space back. There was no drama, no anger, just another quiet ending. I moved again, this time into a detached garage behind a small house owned by an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson. The garage had been converted just enough to be legal. Bare walls, a tiny heater, a folding table. It was cheap, and it was mine. For the first time since losing everything, I could close a door and know it was my own. That garage became the place where I stopped surviving and started planning. I worked longer hours, took on side gigs, helped customers with online orders, learned basic coding from YouTube tutorials during lunch breaks. I stopped scrolling social media because watching other people's happiness felt like torture. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my time, my skills, my silence. One night, while balancing my laptop on the folding table, I realized something that changed me. My family thought they had won because they took my past, but they had no idea what they had created by pushing me into nothing. I had no safety net, no reputation to protect, and nothing left to lose. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me dangerous in a very quiet way. I stopped trying to confront them. I stopped calling. I stopped asking questions. I let them believe I had disappeared, that I was broken, struggling, forgotten. And while they lived comfortably off what they stole, I rebuilt myself piece by piece in a cold garage in Connecticut, fueled by a promise. I never said out loud, but repeated every night before I slept, "This story will not end the way they think it will. Will not end the way they think it will." And that belief became the quiet engine behind every decision I made next. The globe people imagine is loud and flashy, but mine was invisible at first. No new clothes, no sudden confidence, just discipline. I woke up before sunrise in that garage, brewed cheap coffee, and studied before work. During lunch breaks, I practiced skills on my phone. At night, I worked until my eyes burned, telling myself that exhaustion was temporary, but ignorance was expensive. I started small. I offered to manage the bookstore's online listings for a few extra hours a week. Then I helped a local shop owner fix their website for cash. I failed often, made embarrassing mistakes, lost clients before I learned how to keep them. But every failure taught me something my family never expected me to learn: how to negotiate, how to read contracts, how to stay calm when someone tried to overpower me with confidence. Months passed. My income stabilized. Not impressive, but consistent. I opened a separate savings account and promised myself I wouldn't touch it unless it was life or death. I tracked every dollar. I learned how credit worked, how to rebuild it slowly after missed payments from my homeless months. I paid debts in silence. No one clapped. No one noticed. That was the point. The first visible change came when I moved out of the garage. It wasn't a big apartment, just a small studio near downtown New Haven. Thin walls, old appliances, but sunlight through real windows. I remember standing in the empty room, listening to my footsteps echo, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: safety. Not the kind that comes from inheritance, but the kind you earn. I didn't tell my family. I didn't post online. I stayed quiet. I let them believe I was still struggling, still lost. Margaret liked the idea of me failing. It justified what she had done. She asked about me once, casually, through a cousin. The cousin told her I was getting by. Margaret smiled, satisfied. That smile fueled me more than anger ever could. My confidence didn't come from money. It came from knowledge. I understood now how people like her moved assets, hid intentions behind legal language, and used patience as a weapon. I began working for a small consulting firm as a junior analyst, underpaid but learning fast. My boss didn't care about my past, only results. I gave him everything I had. 2 years after I left my mother's house, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I was prettier, but because I was sharper, quieter, unshakable. I dressed simply, spoke less, listened more. People underestimated me constantly. I let them. Underestimation is freedom. One evening, while reviewing financial filings for a client, I saw a familiar last name. Margaret's. My heart didn't race. It didn't hurt. It focused. Out of curiosity, I followed the trail. Trust documents, property transfers. Something didn't add up. The same tricks she had used on me were being repeated elsewhere. Sloppily, this time. Greed makes people careless. I closed my laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt something close to peace. Not because justice had happened, but because it finally could. I wasn't ready yet. I needed more leverage, more proof, more distance between who I was and who I had been. But I knew then that the struggle phase was over. The rebuild was complete. And the next phase wouldn't be about survival or success. It would be about exposure. Was about exposure, and exposure requires proximity. I didn't rush back into their lives like someone seeking forgiveness. I moved carefully, quietly, the way people do when they have nothing to prove. It started with a holiday message to a cousin I barely spoke to anymore. Simple, polite, no emotion. Just enough to remind them I still existed. Word traveled faster than I expected. It always does in families like mine. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to a small family gathering in Westchester County, New York. Margaret would be there. So would Richard. The invitation wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was curious. They wanted to see what I looked like now. If I was still broken. If guilt had aged me. I accepted without hesitation. I chose my appearance carefully. Nothing flashy. No designer labels. Clean, modest, forgettable. I arrived early, helped in the kitchen, smiled when spoken to, kept my voice soft. Margaret hugged me longer than necessary, her eyes scanning me the way investors scan risk. I could feel her relief when she realized I wasn't a threat. Yet, over dinner, she talked about property investments, about how well the family trust was doing, about responsibility and wisdom. She spoke as if she were teaching a lesson. I listened like a student. I asked innocent questions. I let her explain things she thought I didn't understand. Every word she said filled in gaps I already knew existed. In the weeks that followed, I stayed present but distant. I attended birthdays. I sent thank you notes. I became predictable. Meanwhile, I dug deeper. Public records, filings, shell, LLCs, tied to addresses I recognized. Funds moved just far enough to look legal, just messy enough to unravel if someone looked closely. I looked closely. I met with an attorney, not as a victim this time, but as a consultant. I didn't mention family at first. I presented patterns, numbers, anomalies. His interest sharpened. When I finally said the last name, he leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly, like a man who had just found the missing piece to a long puzzle. I gathered everything patiently. Emails saved, conversations documented, dates aligned. I never confronted, never accused. I let them grow comfortable, careless, loud. Margaret liked to brag. She liked to feel untouchable. And nothing exposes a person faster than believing they've already won. The final invitation came from Margaret herself, a celebration dinner. She said the trust had reached a milestone. She wanted family present. She wanted me there. I agreed. I arrived, calm, composed, carrying nothing but a small folder in my bag and years of silence in my chest. When the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just facts, placed on the table, one by one. Documents, transfers, signatures, patterns even she couldn't explain away. The room went quiet. Richard stopped speaking. Margaret's smile froze, then cracked. She tried to talk her way out. She always did. But this time, she wasn't speaking to a grieving girl. She was speaking to a woman who understood every word she said, and exactly how it could be used against her. I didn't ask for my inheritance back. Not then. I asked one question instead, calmly, clearly, in front of everyone. How long did you think I would stay silent? The answer didn't matter. The regret did. It spread across her face slowly, not loud, not apologetic, just terrified. Of honor, not money. And that truth began to unfold faster than any of them expected. Within days of that dinner, the attorney I had consulted initiated formal inquiries. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. It was worse. an audit request, then another. Then a notice of review tied to the trust's tax filings. The kind of paperwork that makes confident people stop sleeping. Margaret called me repeatedly. I didn't answer. Richard sent long messages filled with half apologies and carefully worded concern. I saved everything. Silence had become my strongest ally. When the first letter from a federal agency arrived at Margaret's office, panic finally replaced arrogance. She tried to spin it as routine, then as a misunderstanding. Then she stopped explaining altogether. The family felt it next. Bank accounts temporarily frozen. Property sales delayed. Investors asking questions they didn't like answering. Whispers began at social gatherings. People who once praised Margaret's brilliance suddenly kept their distance. Respect evaporates quickly when trust is questioned. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was consequence. Everything happening was legal, documented, earned. The same system she had used to erase me was now examining her with unforgiving precision. When the formal charges were filed, they weren't dramatic. No handcuffs, no headlines yet. Just thick documents outlining years of misrepresentation, conflict of interest, and financial misconduct. Enough to ruin reputations built over decades. Enough to make allies disappear overnight. Margaret finally asked to meet. Not as my aunt, as a woman afraid of losing everything. We sat in a quiet cafe in Hartford. She looked smaller somehow, older. Her voice trembled when she spoke my name. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said it was business. She said she thought I would recover, move on, forget. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her the truth she had never considered, that I didn't do this to get rich. I did it because she taught me how power really works. She taught me that silence is permission, and I chose not to give it any more. She cried then, not loudly, not convincingly. It didn't move me. Regret, that comes only after consequences, isn't remorse. It's fear wearing a mask. I walked away from that meeting lighter than I expected. Not because I had won, but because I had finished. The legal process continued without me needing to speak again. My role was done. The rest belonged to courts, records, and time. Months later, the trust was dissolved. Assets were seized, redistributed, and scrutinized. Some money came back to me eventually. Not everything. Enough. More than enough. But by then, money felt secondary. What mattered was this. They could no longer rewrite the story. The girl they erased came back, educated, patient, and impossible to ignore. Years later, I walk the streets of Boston, fully aware of the journey that brought me here. Every corner, every building reminds me of the nights I spent in my car, the dim basement, the cold garage. I don't feel bitterness anymore. Those experiences taught me resilience. They taught me strategy. They taught me the value of silence, patience, and observation. I mentor young women now, anonymously in some cases, sharing what I've learned without ever revealing the family names or the details that could endanger anyone. They ask about revenge. I tell them, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming yourself, building boundaries, and understanding the power you always had but didn't know how to use. Sometimes I think of Margaret, her frozen smile at that dinner, the subtle panic in Richard's voice. I wonder if they ever sleep peacefully. Probably not. Regret has a long shadow, but I don't revel in it. I don't need to. Watching them realize the consequences in their own lives was enough. My life is mine now. Quiet mornings, productive days, evenings filled with purpose. I own nothing because of someone else's hand. I own it because I built it brick by brick, in patience, in silence, in the unglamorous struggle no one saw. And that is the final truth of my story. The girl who lost everything came back. Not with rage, not with noise, not with vengeance, but with knowledge, skill, and calm certainty. Theirs was temporary power. Mine is permanent freedom. I survived. I grew. I won. And that, finally, is enough.